until his walk was interrupted by the little wooden gate with a placard, "First-class passengers only." There had been a time when the class distinction would have read like an insult, but now the class divisions were too subdivided to mean anything at all. He stared up the first-class deck. There was only one man out in the cold like himself, collar turned up. He stood in the bow, looking out towards Dover. Dee went back into the stern, and again, as regular as his tread, the bombing planes took off. You could trust nobody but yourself, and sometimes you were uncertain whether, after all, you could trust yourself. They didn't trust you, any more than they had trusted the friend with the Holy Medal. They were right then. And who was to say whether they were not right now? You. You were a prejudiced party. The ideology was a complex affair. Heresies crept in. He wasn't certain that he wasn't watched at this moment. He wasn't certain that it wasn't right for him to be watched. After all, there were aspects of economic materialism which, if he searched his heart, he did not accept. And the watcher? Was he watched? He was haunted for a moment by the vision of an endless distrust. In an inner pocket, a bulge over the breast, he carried what were called credentials. But credence no longer meant belief. He walked slowly back, the length of his chain. Through the fog, a young female voice cried harshly and distinctly, "I'm going to have one more. I will have one more." Somewhere a lot of glass broke. Somebody was crying behind a lifeboat. It was a strange world, wherever you were. He walked cautiously round the bow of the boat and saw a child, wedged in a corner. He stood and looked at it. It didn't mean a thing to him. It was like writing, so illegible you didn't even try to decipher it. He wondered whether he would ever again share anybody's emotion. He said to it in a gentle, dutiful way, "What is the matter?" "I bumped my head." He said, "Are you alone?" "Dad stood me here." "Because you bumped your head?" "He said it wasn't any cause to take on." The child had stopped crying. It began to cough, the fog in the throat. Dark eyes stared out of their cave between boat and rail defensively. Dee turned and walked on. It occurred to him that he shouldn't have spoken. The child was probably watched by a father or a mother. He came up to the barrier, first-class passengers only, and looked through. The other man was approaching through the fog, walking the longer length of his chain. Dee saw first the pressed trousers, then the fur collar, and last the face. They stared at each other across the low gate. Taken by surprise, they had nothing to say. Besides, they had never spoken to each other. They were separated by different initial letters, a great many deaths. They had seen each other in a passage years ago, once in a railway station, and once on a landing field. Dee couldn't even remember his name. The other man was the first to move away. Thin as celery inside his thick coat, tall, he had an appearance of nerves and agility. He walked fast, on legs like stilts, stiffly, but you felt they might fold up. He looked as if he had already decided on some action, Dee thought. He will probably try to rob me. Perhaps he will try to have me killed. He would certainly have more helpers and more money and more friends. He would bear letters of introduction to peers and ministers. He had once had some kind of title himself, years ago, before the Republic. Count, Marquis. Dee had forgotten exactly what. It was a misfortune that they were both travelling on the same boat, and that they should have seen each other like that at the barrier between the classes. Two confidential agents wanting the same thing. The siren shrieked again, and suddenly, out of the fog, like faces looking through a window, came ships, lights, a wedge of breakwater. They were one of a crowd. The engine went half-speed and then stopped altogether. Dee could hear the water slap, slap the side. They drifted, apparently sideways. Somebody shouted invisibly, as though from the sea itself. They sidled forward and were there. It was a simple